Greetings, friends. I'm Reverend Charlene Manuel. On behalf of Unity World Headquarters, I welcome you to the 2023 celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you for joining us. On August 28, 1963, during the March on Washington, Dr. King addressed a crowd at the Lincoln Memorial with his speech, "I Have a Dream." 60 years have passed since that speech. 60 years. What has transpired in the years since that historic event? Today, we invite you to reflect on Dr. King and the impact he has had on your life and our lives collectively. Through peaceful protests, he sought equality and human rights for African Americans, the economically disadvantaged, and all victims of injustice. What does he represent in the world? And how does his legacy live on during these times of great challenge? Our conversation today will focus on our past, our present, and most important, our future. We are building on his dream. We are standing on his shoulders. Today, we remember Dr. King's legacy with these words from his message that hot day in Washington. Even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Thank you, dear friends, for joining us. We welcome you to this celebration.
Wherever there is need, love will find a way. There is a space in my heart where I find the truth. I find me and you, a truth beyond what you may see now. But when we are one, we bring more good about. No matter who or what you call yourself or where you come from, yeah. There is a place in this world with open arms right now. Welcome to love and welcome to peace. Welcome to our community. Be who you are and let your light shine. We're so much more when we unite. You are welcome here. You are welcome here.
Greetings and blessings, everyone. I am Reverend Jackie Hawkins, and I am delighted to be with you today as part of the celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy. As Reverend Charlene said in her introduction, this year is the 60th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech. Arguably, the I Have a Dream speech is the most iconic of the 20th century. It galvanized social, political, and spiritual change in this country. Not since the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation by President Abraham Lincoln has our country seen such change. I remember as a child, I saw the March on Washington from the television set at home. I was there with my mother and my siblings while my father was in Washington with the other 250,000 some people around the reflecting pool. Years later, I met in person Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I was a young 17-year-old freshman at Spelman College, and I joined his church along with other friends of mine. And on a Sunday evening at Ebenezer Baptist Church, he extended to me, along with others who were new, the right hand of fellowship. I will always remember that. To recall it now gives me goosebumps. His warmth, his eloquence, his caring all came through. He treated me as though I was as important as anyone else. Here, this giant of a spiritual leader was looking me straight in the eyes, and I was truly inspired. From that moment forward, I knew that I needed to inspire others because he was such an inspiration to me. Joining me today is an illustrious panel, 4 people whom you will see are uniquely talented, visionaries, unity ministers from different parts of the country. I would like to introduce them now. First is Reverend Diana McDaniel. Reverend Diana McDaniel currently serves as a senior minister at Unity Church of San Leandro in San Leandro, California. She's been active in the Unity movement for many years, serving in many leadership positions, including on the Unity Worldwide Ministries Board of Trustees and the West Central Region Board. Next, we have Reverend Dr. James Trapp, who's currently serving as the Senior Minister of Worship and Community Outreach at Spiritual Life Center in Sacramento, California. He's an accomplished teacher and practitioner of mindfulness meditation, author of an excellent book titled Take Back Your Future, and an inductee into Morehouse College's Martin Luther King Jr. International Board of Preachers. Next, we have Reverend Sylvia Sumter, and she has been serving as the Senior Minister of Unity of Washington, D.C. since 1991. She's a gifted teacher and professional counselor, and among her many roles, she's the founder of the Stand Up for Humanity movement located in Washington, D.C. In addition, she's currently the first vice chair of the Board of Trustees of Unity Worldwide Ministries. And last but certainly not least, we have Reverend Eric Ovid Donaldson, who currently serves as Senior Associate Minister of Unity of Sacramento's International Spiritual Center. His church leadership experience spans more than 30 years. Among his many roles, he includes coach, healer, and teacher. Welcome all my friends, and let us go right into our dialogue on the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Diana, I would first like to pose a question to you. When you think of Dr. King, what impact has he had on your life?
Wow, Jackie, that's a big question. And I want to say I loved hearing your story. I'm just a little jealous. I would have loved to have met him. He has had a major impact on my life. on all of our lives. I think the whole world has been impacted by him. His dreams of equality and freedom described what I feel, and I think all people of color feel. You know, when he talked about his little children playing with other little children of different colors, you know, that we want to be judged by the content of our character, not by the color of our skin. And for me personally, you know, I wouldn't have gone to the schools that I went to. I grew up in the segregated South. So it was white schools and Black schools. And I can remember driving past an elementary school and my parents, me telling them that I wanted to go to that school because it looked so nice. And they told me, no, you don't want to go to that school. And I said, yes, I do. They said, no, you don't. Get it, you know, that this was a school that I would not be treated well in. And I sort of take it as before Martin Luther King Jr. and after Martin Luther King Jr. That because I later was able to go to a school on that same campus, but it was directly due to the leadership and the movement and the civil rights workers that were led by Dr. King. So I feel like my life was directly impacted in many ways.
Thank
you know what? Let me share one more thing.
Of course.
Luther King was assassinated. My mother was teaching at a community college. She was so angry, so hurt. She went to she was at a white community college. It was at that time. And she told her department head, somebody needs to teach a course on African-American studies. Something needs to happen. We need to know our history. And he said he appointed her, told her she needed to do it. And as a result of his death, it inspired her to teach. And hers was the first African-American history course in the state of Florida.
Wonderful. Thank you, Diana, for sharing that. James, tell me how Dr. King has influenced you as a minister and African-American male.
Well, that's a very good question, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel today. What Diana mentioned the time when he was assassinated. I remember I was a young teenager at the time, and I knew he was important, but I didn't really understand his philosophy of nonviolence. At that time, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And at the time, I was probably one of those young, impatient Black men who aligned with the more militant philosophy. And over time, I became more knowledgeable and more aware of Dr. Martin Luther King's perspective, particularly the power of love. And I realized that he was talking really about a soul force, because I always looked at it as being a feeling, and I couldn't love people that I did not like. That didn't seem sensible to me.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the most important things, to get an insight of what that really meant. I think another thing that was important to me, that influenced me, particularly in my way as a minister, and maybe my philosophy about life, is that you have to paint a vivid picture of the future. And I think his I Have a Dream speech was really about painting a picture about the possibilities of what we can become, and the power of our words. And he was a great orator, and how important the words we speak begin to shape our reality. So that was a very important part of, I think, his influence on me. Probably the most important impact was the idea that we are all interconnected. And realizing, and I didn't grasp this until later on, probably when I got into my own ministry studies, about, whatever we do to anyone else, we are doing to ourselves. And I think his quote was something to the effect that we're part of this inescapable network of reality, is what he called it. We're tied to a single garment, so to speak. And I would say that point has been a golden thread in my personal philosophy as a minister. So that would be the things that I would say have influenced me over time, and I'm still learning. His philosophy and the impact and the depth of it. But those are the things I would say that I've felt most influenced by over my career.
Thank you, James. Sylvia, you have lived in Washington, D.C. for many years. How has the King legacy influenced you and your congregation, impacted you and your congregation?
I love the question because, legacy to me means something that is long lasting and enduring. And I have the blessed opportunity to live here in Washington, D.C. And I remember when I first took this church and I felt called to somehow bring that unity philosophy into the heart of our nation's capital. And so in being here, that was great. But in my time being here, I have seen the African-American Museum erected on the National Mall, and also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s monument and the wall. And, one of the things that I love is that, as James said, he was not only a great orator, but he was a anointed and appointed and inspired messenger, prophet. And what a messenger brings is the message and words. And he had a way of speaking words that were anointed so that when the listener either hears them or reads them, they are moved automatically and inspired by them. And that to me is so impactful, because what I have an opportunity to do when people come to town and visitors come, I'll take them to both of those places. But one of the things that is so moving is to go to the wall. People, know the statue, but behind the statue is a wall of quotes. And on that wall, those quotes, when you start from the north wall to the south wall and you read every single quote and stay there with it, it is so moving and transforming, because those words are, they're laced with his spirit and they're carrying a vibration. Words carry vibration. And so when I go, I just read them over, but I'm standing there and I read the words as I move along the wall. And it is so impactful and so moving, because his words are part of his legacy, and it's long lasting, and I believe, anointed. So when I speak, I always want my words to carry a deeper message that could also be long lasting, and inspired and anointed. That's what I think we all as ministers want to do, is to have our words reach people. And so he was a great thinker, a great philosopher, a great metaphysician. He might not call himself that, but he was a great metaphysician and a theologian. And all of that surrounded his thinking and his words and his spirit. So my people, and the quote that I think I love the most, because we call ourselves at our church light bearers. And I believe that part of our purpose of being in Washington, D.C. is to be that foundation of light, to hold the light, to hold the energy for the nation. And when he said that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. And hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. And so my congregation, we know that we're here for a divine purpose, to be light bearers. So he's just, that spirit is just a beautiful spirit. And we just I love it. And anyone who comes to DC is going to go for a visit to his monument and the African-American Museum, because those two things I think are so powerful for us as a people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sylvia.
Mhm.
And Eric, I want to ask you, how does Dr. King's truth continue to march on in your life, especially during these challenging times?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm enjoying this immensely. I'm greatly excited about this opportunity. The short answer is that Dr. King's truth marches on in me and in others like me who are inspired, like Sylvia and like James and like Diana, when they hear those words from that speech during the March on Washington. That's the short answer. But there are other truths that Dr. King has shared with us that continue to march on for me, and particularly during this time. And that's why I encourage everybody not just to become familiar with the speech where we tend to start it. We tend to start it at, I have a dream, but to really wind the tape back a little bit and start at the beginning of that speech, because it's absolutely profound. Yes, that moment where he starts into his dream, that vision, as he was, as I understand it, was encouraged to do by Mahalia Jackson.
Yes.
She was the one that said, tell him about the dream, Reverend, tell him about the dream. And that's when he shifted. But that's not to say that the message that he had prepared wasn't as important. And in my mind and in my heart, I believe that it was not only profound, but it may very well be prophetic if we're not careful. He was talking about things like our refusal as a society to see that the bank of justice is bankrupt. You talk about some powerful words. This man knew how to put a sentence together. I'm just saying. He understood how to articulate, give a vision on something, give you an image that made sense to everyone. It didn't matter if you knew him or if you were part of his culture or part of another culture. You understood where he was coming from. He talked about things like the fierce urgency of now versus the tranquilizing drug of gradualization. That right there is powerful for me, because it tells me that although he was about nonviolence, we often think of people who are nonviolent as being weak. But this man was about having change and having it now. And he could put it in a way that you understood why now is the time. He also talked about how we are to conduct ourselves when we are moving for change. He talked about staying on the high plane of dignity and discipline. And he expected that from anybody that follows him. And so think about where we are right now in this great nation of ours, and how we're teeter-tottering on some of these elements that Dr. King spoke about. You know, if I were to fast forward, I would think of Michelle Obama when she said, when they go low, we go high. That's the same thing, but that's something that Dr. King understood was necessary in order for us to move forward peacefully. And so for me, that truth is marching on as well. That truth is something that we need to revisit and to recommit ourselves to, so that we can get through the challenges that our society faces today. If I may, I got a story that I have to share. It won't take long, because I'm inspired by your story. I kind of met Dr. King because Dr. King, a few weeks prior to the March on Washington, was in Detroit, Michigan, where I grew up. And my mom and dad was at that march. And my mom had a poster, a picket sign up with an arrow pointing down and the words, "Me too." That arrow was pointing at me. She was pregnant with me at the time.
Oh, that is so sweet. I love that. Thank you for sharing that,
Wow.
Eric. Absolutely. You were there.
I was there.
And you know, Dr. King called the civil rights movement a spiritual movement. He always said that. And in my belief, the reason the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s was so successful was because it was grounded in spirit. It was grounded in divine love. As Dr. King said, it wasn't a sentimentality kind of love. It was divine love, a love that is unconditional, that's transformational, regardless of who you are. If you're my enemy, I love you. If you're my friend, I love you. Let's walk together and ensure that changes are made. I'd like to share this quote from Dr. King, and I'd like to throw it out to everyone in the form of a question. And this quote is, "Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love." Now, if Dr. King were here, and we know his spirit is with us today, how would you respond to him when he said that to you? How would you respond? Diana.
You know, when I think about him, I think about that love statement, and I think about when people bombed his house, you know, the fire bombs, and he told people not to retaliate. And I thought to myself, I don't know if I could do that, you know, and how John Lewis talked about his ability to love people.
Yeah.
And even hearing how he paid for that actress's birth, you know, we just heard about in the news, Julia Roberts. You know, it is, I think I would have to say I have a lot of work to do. I have to focus more on being able to expand in a way to hear other people's words and to accept other people's actions, and and I would have to say to him, I don't know if I can do it, but I'm working on it.
Okay. James, I see you smiling there. What would you say to Dr. King?
Well, part of it, as I was listening to Diana, I was thinking about, I was probably asking her, how do you do it? You know, because, when she was telling her story, what I'm reminded of another story where I think he had just completed a speech, was getting ready to do a speech, and some man walked up to him and asked him, "Are you Dr. Martin Luther King?" And he said, "Yes." And the man spit in his face. And normally a reaction would be not nonviolent. And he took out a handkerchief, wiped the spittle off his face, and handed the handkerchief to the man and said to him, "I think this belongs to you."
Yes.
So when I realized, that he had so much conviction in his values, that in the moment where you would think instinct would take over, his values took over. And what I'm beginning to understand is that, when he talked about, the power of love, and how it's really the difference that it makes, because I'm understanding that this is what binds us together. As we look at a lot of the polarization that we see in our country and even the world today, the division, what it reflects is an absence of love, because love builds connection, builds us together. And I think of a quote from the late, great Jimi Hendrix. And I believe that he said something to the effect that when the power of love
Yeah.
is more important than the love of power, that is when we will have peace.
Mhm.
And I think he embodied that to such a degree that it can make a difference. And that's really at the center of his philosophy, because it is an energy that we
Yeah.
want to capture and demonstrate. And it doesn't always show up, I don't think, in a way that's comfortable. Uh,
Mm.
but I realize that sometimes you do loving acts, it's not always a comfortable thing. And I had to get that kind of into my head as well, that there's sometimes a human discomfort when we're really coming from the foundation of that loving energy that we all have and want to express to make a difference in the world.
Thank you, James. Sylvia?
Yeah, I'm loving this conversation and this thought, especially around the concept of love, because as we all know, it is greater than human love or sentimental love. And he was helping us to understand, unless we come from a higher love, from divine love, it may not be possible to receive all of the negativity and the hatred and all of that, or to not respond in kind. So he always, for me, is encouraging us to tap into that deeper place. But what I also love when he says power at its best is love. So he equates love with two things here in that quote: power and justice.
Yes.
That you can, so when you really have a defined sense of spiritual love, divine love, power comes with that automatically, and so does justice. Because in order to have justice, you have to have a higher love, which would be understanding love, compassionate. You'd have to be compassionate, have compassion for others. You'd have to have understanding of another's place and where they are and standing in their shoes. All of these things, that's what gives you power. But that justice comes from that, and all of that comes from love, divine love. So I think this is what we need right now, because if you just go and you present love as a concept to people right now, as a force for healing, I don't think it'll be received well, because people are like, I can't love these people. I can't love this. So it's not so much presenting the concept of love to them, but you coming from a place where you are in touch with your capacity, so that the highest and best from you can receive whatever it is, and your being, your beinghood becomes the vessel or the energy for transformation. Because I can't change the other, but as I'm changed, the other will change, because my interactions with them will change, because my vibration will be one of love. So it's very powerful.
That's right.
Very powerful.
Eric, will you want to weigh in on this?
I do. God is love. So when you're talking about the power of love, I would share with Dr. King how appreciative I am about how he modeled love, and how divinity, his divine self, came forth in a most powerful and profound way. I was taught that love expresses itself in many, many ways, infinite number of ways, as cooperation, as goodwill, as loving kindness, and so forth. Many, many ways that you could describe it. But it wasn't until Dr. King showed up that love had the descriptor of respect, justice, dignity, love of self.
I love it.
All of a sudden came into this picture in a most profound way. And then, if that wasn't enough, Dr. King showed us how to produce that love in a very difficult circumstance. I was reading his letter from the Birmingham City Jail. And he laid out the 4 things that are required in order to address some of the most difficult situations. He talked about getting the facts first and foremost. Then he talked about negotiating in the context of love. Then, and this is what this is the power of love to me and how committed he was to it. He implemented a self-purification process so that when he went forth, knowing that he may be spat upon, knowing that he may have been bitten by dogs, knowing that he may not come out of it alive, he was still clear that he was going to be the personification of love in the matter. And then, and this is kind of funny to me, but then there was direct, nonviolent action. And that action put tension into the room. It made people uncomfortable. So here we've got this power of love going on, and the light of that love making darkness uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I love it. Have not seen anything quite like this until Kaepernick. How someone can get on their knee and cause such chaos and commotion non-violently was absolutely amazing to me. I think that was another example of love that we first saw in our lifetimes from Dr. King.
Thank you. Thank you all. Again, love his core message, his core example. That is how he lived. He lived Jesus's teachings. He was serious when he adopted Jesus's teachings and Mahatma Gandhi's nonviolence. But I would also say that he also adopted Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman's mystical messages and ways of his nonviolent stance as well. So Martin Luther King's legacy is so rich. It goes all the way back, more than 2,000 years did Martin Luther King embrace the kind of love that he then generated. You know, love is never depleted. Divine love is never depleted. And that, again, is the reason that the movement that he led was so successful, and why we are still continuing to be beneficiaries of his legacy, of his words, of his stance. And I'd like for us to close just by me reading some of the love quotes of Dr. King. And I won't go into, you know, the hundreds of quotes, but one that just truly moves me is, I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden.
Yeah.
I have decided to stick with love. Hate is too great a burden. Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. The only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. And this last quote, which is so profoundly truthful for today, is very present for us today, is I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. This is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant.
Mhm.
May you all be blessed today with love in your hearts, with the conviction to continue living the legacy of Dr. King. We close with the prayer of protection that is, in my view, so Kingian, although he did not write it. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us wherever we are. As we celebrate 60 years since the I Have a Dream speech, wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you.
Many blessings.
Blessings, blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Peace and
you.
blessings.
In August of 2022, there was an event at Unity Village called Celebrating Our Soul. During that event, I had the opportunity to visit with many of the event attendees. And we discussed the impact Dr. King has on their lives. Let's take a look.
Dr. King, for me, has been such a tremendous impact. He represented peace. He represented love for humankind, all humankind, and he represented an insistence that you are love and I am love, and therefore I can speak to that love principle in you and draw it out of you, and that I can love you even in your error and see the highest for you.
The impact that Dr. Martin Luther King had on my life is the idea of perseverance, to never give up, to know that there is always a dream greater than me, and the only way that I can get there is I just have to keep going.
Dr. King was and is a symbol of peace, empowerment, and justice. As an African-American man who was raised right after his transition or assassination, I was very much affected by his life and his assassination. My parents and grandparents made sure that I knew how important he was to all people in the world, and especially Black people in America, and his picture was literally in my grandparents' living room.
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Has been, for me, a model of what leadership can look like. A reminder that we can overcome the seeming obstacles that confront us in any situation. And regardless of what those obstacles are, what we believe we have to do to get ahead, the reality is that we have to keep a single eye focused on truth.
My parents were intimately involved in the civil rights movement, so they took us to marches and we got to observe a lot of what was happening in the world, including we were in Birmingham when the 16th Street Baptist Church was blown up. So that's been a part of my DNA, my whole life, being kind of a justice warrior, even as a small person. So with that being said, this whole idea or this whole concept, this whole living experience of being a peace warrior, nonviolence, that's just part of who I am. So I think that's the best way to answer that question.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a major impact on my life. I was a kid when he was assassinated April the 4th, 1968. And I remember driving down Broward Boulevard with my parents, and some men in a truck drove past us and yelled to us, "We killed your king." And that had a major impact on me because from what I knew living in the South, Dr. King was one who simply wanted equality, equal rights for all people, not just Black people, but for all people, and for all of us to live together as children of God. Or as he said, if we don't live together, then we will perish together as fools. So he has been very meaningful for me in my life.
Dr. King was, continues to be amazing in terms of the layers of his legacy that have shown up as I've become older. I remembered him coming to Chicago, which is where I'm originally from, and brought his sensibilities and his philosophy and his intent to bring some calm and nonviolence to the South Side community and the West Side community, the community at large, actually, and found out that actually Chicago showed more violence and racism than he had actually experienced when he was in the South and in Montgomery.
The impact that Dr. King had on my life was tremendous. As a child growing up, I heard this voice that was a prophetic voice, a voice that lifted me up to believe that I was of value and worth. And he was that voice of the civil rights movement that lifted the consciousness and the awareness of this nation to live up to its ideals.
I think Dr. King represented, number one, get involved, okay? So it was that the whole concept of don't just sit and look, but in fact, get involved, have an impact.
What impacted me most about Dr. King was his commitment to nonviolence. I didn't really understand since I was born in 1960, and the civil rights movement was well underway by the time I was born. But I understood what it meant to be and live in a nonviolent way. I completely subscribe to being nonviolent. And that is not only in a physical way, but in a spiritual way, and how I communicate with others.
Dr. King impacted me the most just with his sheer humanity. He was a regular person doing regular things, but somehow he knew that he was here to make a difference. And if he can make a difference, so can I.
When I think of Dr. King, the things that impacted me the most were the ideal of love. Dr. King was a preacher and my dad was a preacher, and they both preached about love and the courage to love in the face of hate and dark circumstances and appearances. So when I think of Dr. King, I think of that, holding that space of love and being about nonviolence in the face of adversity.
I think he represented a man who was willing to, even in the face of violence, threats to his home, threats to his family, he was still able to continue his work and still fight for justice and fight against injustice wherever he saw it.
Learning at the same time the things that occurred during the civil rights movement for the first time made me realize I'd taken for granted what others gave their lives to obtain. And it changed my whole perspective. I then became one of the top graduating students of that school by 9th grade, changed the whole trajectory, got a scholarship back to the private school I had been dismissed from before, graduated as class president, went on to West Point Military Academy, and then realized I wasn't a soldier and transferred to Morehouse College. So because of MLK, I went to Morehouse to follow in his footsteps, if you will.
If you read his papers from graduate school that he wrote as part of his dissertation or other presentations that he made moving through graduate school, you realize how brilliant this man was. And to make the choice to align himself with the people was just enormous, because he had an opportunity not to do that. This is someone who went to college at 16 that had every opportunity to sort of move in the pathways that the gifted get to move. And he made a choice to align himself with poor people and to take a stand for justice and a stand against injustice, and to pay whatever price that is. So for me, that's huge. To me, that's what we're here for. There is one of the Gospels, one of the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Mary. We only have fragments, but when you read the fragments, what you get is that it ties spiritual enlightenment with taking a stand against social injustice. And I feel like Dr. King really embodied that I didn't just get all of this for me, I got it to give, to pass on to others.
Nonviolence, peace, peaceful resolution. When there is conflict, there are several ways of looking at it, and sometimes it's time to stand up and be heard. Sometimes it's time to bear witness, and sometimes it's time to sometimes just write a check. But what that also means is you still stand on the correct side, or what I believe to be the correct side of justice, fairness, kindness, love.
The last part of his life was about economic injustice. And so I really believe that is the legacy that he left us to pick up on, to know that we are now at a place of being able to access capital. And I think that that's a very important message, that he would have been able to say it in that way. How are we as a people now going to access capital and have the economic justice that we deserve?
One of my favorite quotes from King is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." So we still got a lot of injustice going on in the world. And so his words and his examples still shine bright for me, and for all of us to speak up, not only for the Black race, for the African American race, but for humanity as a whole, to bring about a world that works for everyone. And until that's done in every place in the world, then it's a threat to any other place in the world.
The courage to listen to a different drum major. The courage to listen to something higher that's greater than and transcends, and at times goes against man's law. The courage to speak truth to illusion. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. modeled, and that lives on in many of us who learn from his example. That lives on in many of us who are standing up for those who are being oppressed today, those who are being marginalized, those who are being demonized for things that they shouldn't be.
It's important for us to remember that Dr. King, like other important leaders and prophets throughout time and history, was pointing the finger back to us. That the importance of who he is for us and for his message to us is that there is no savior coming to rescue us. that all that we need is within us, and it is our responsibility to bring it forth into the world, to do our part.
People understand now that they have a voice. There will always be people in society that will try to tell you that you don't have a voice, that you don't have agency, that you don't have power. Dr. King is an example, not was, but is an example of a person who believed in something so strongly, in the right treatment of all human beings, in justice and opportunity for all human beings, for the understanding of the brotherhood and sisterhood of all humanity under one common God, that he was willing to march, to protest, to stand, and challenge any belief or person who did not live up to that lofty creed. Therefore, I believe that the spirit of his justice lives on every time someone takes a stand for justice, for peace, for harmony, for nonviolent resistance, and the understanding that we truly are one, and we don't have to wait for anyone to validate or give us permission to live as the child of God that we have been created to be and are.
Well, one of the things that in recent years we've seen the Black Lives Matter. That is clearly something that is an example of the truth of, Dr. Martin Luther King, when King said that all children deserve the right to a good education, to a sound life, and the same access as all, that Black children deserve the same thing as white children to have that access, is basically what the Black Lives Matter is saying, that our lives matter. So children coming up in that sort of truth will claim that their lives matter.
Well, I can tell you, even living in Kingston, Jamaica, his truth march is on. He would travel to Jamaica and relax, and he is quoted as saying that he felt the freest in Jamaica because he felt like a man whenever he came to visit the country of Jamaica. His work lives on and it marches on. If you're a student of King and you are reading books, and I highly recommend The Strength to Love. I read it all the time, prepare sermons from his messages, and I believe he lives on and is a reminder throughout the U.S. where there are streets named after him, there are schools named after him, and to the degree that we keep the dream alive in our heart, that we really all are one, and we are.
Well, as a singer-songwriter, his message innately connects to me through music, which is timeless. So many years ago, my mother, also a singer-songwriter, wrote a song about Martin Luther King. She wrote children's songs about those that were leaders in the civil rights era. And she wrote the song that goes like this. Martin Luther King was a great black man with a beautiful dream. He taught nonviolence till the day he died, shot in cold blood, and the whole world cried, Martin Luther King was a great black man with a beautiful dream. And so I teach this song that was inspired obviously by his life to my children, my grandchildren, and I absolutely expect that they will do the same.
rises up in the magic. And when your joy overflows and you're filled with compassion, that's love. That's love. What you see and what you learn, it's not the ultimate concern. It's what you choose to think and be. Feel the truth that sets you free.